Welcome back to Adventures in Learning Design. We are about to kick off Season 2 and great things await. But before we do that, I'm going to hand over to Tim, who has some news to share. Tim, what's going on?
Hey man, Laurie, thank you very much. The news is that I won't be taking part in Series 2, sadly.
What?
Yeah, I have decided to move on from LearnJam to new things. So I won't be taking that journey with you, unfortunately. But I wish you all the best, and I'm sure it's going to be a really thrilling, interesting series.
Well, it won't be the same without you, Tim.
Well, no, but it'll be awesome. I know it'll be awesome.
Onwards and upwards. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're going to miss you, Tim.
And I'll miss you, and I look forward to hearing the episodes as they come out. So just to let you know where I'm going, after 8 incredible years of LearnJam, I've decided to make a move to pastures new, and I'm now a senior learning designer at a company called Multiverse, who is reimagining the future of education by providing an outstanding alternative to university and workplace training. And I'm working on developing apprenticeship programs at Multiverse, as well as bringing a lot of the work that I've done with LearnJam around learning design principles to bear on their programs, and helping in order to help apprentices thrive, be successful, and unlock potential futures. So it's with a heavy heart that I say farewell to the Adventures in Learning Design podcast. It's been an absolute joy to be part of it.
Yeah, Tim. Well, your adventure in learning design continues in a different form.
Yep.
So,
But you know, the Adventures in Learning Design podcast goes from strength to strength, because in my place, you get the incredible, talented Laura Patsko stepping in as your co-presenter, Laurie. You lucky, lucky thing.
This
Hello.
is true.
Hello. Thank you.
Hello,
Thank you. What an
Laura.
intro.
Yeah.
Laura, how does it feel to be stepping into co-host?
It feels very exciting, a little bit daunting to be filling your shoes. And we're really going to miss having you on the show as a co-host. But I'm very excited, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to take over from what you've started. It's been a great first year.
Oh, mate, I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. Really excited. I think it's going to be a great series.
I think so too, definitely. And it would be great to hear from you before you leave us forever. What were your top three, 4 moments? Like, what did you really enjoy from the first year? Because we're coming up to the podcast is almost a year old. What's been your standout moments?
Yeah, crumbs. I will selfishly respond with 4 standout memories.
Go for it.
I think that there's a big standout memory. I think it was in episode 7 in our call with Martin Bloomfield, where I think if you listen back to that, I used the word like mind blown several times, or how Martin blew my mind. I think blew yours, Laurie, as well, in the course of that conversation several times, when he just completely reframed the conversation around dyslexia. And I think he led with the sort of the steer, the sort of advice to not think of it as a condition, but to think of it as an experience. And then the rest of that episode was just a really incredible introduction and explanation and journey through what it's like to experience dyslexia, what it means for us as learning designers. A really incredible episode, and one that I often listen back to just because it's full of so much great stuff. So that conversation really shone out for me as a high point. Episode 8, this is memory 3, when we spoke to our co-founder and good friend Nick Robinson about innovation. And again, a very sort of loose conversation, but like the way Nick called out the need or the ability for organizations to foster innovation internally, like strategies they could use to do that rather than hiving innovation off as a separate sort of initiative, was really interesting. And again, I think that episode particularly stood out as one that, you know, just the stuff that happens when you talk, when you just talk to people with no particular structure, just asking questions, and the great stuff that can come out of it. So that again is another sort of favorite episode for me. the most recent one, or the latest one, or the last one we did together with Rachel Nemeth of Opus is one that stands out also. And hearing about Rachel and her journey and how she responded to a really clear need in workplace training, and how that ended up being in the form of Opus's text message-based workplace training methodology, and just the story she told around it, again, was quite mind-blowing and really inspirational as well. So that's one that I really, think fondly back on. And the last memory of the year, I think, that really stands out and I'll always cherish is like the episode 1, Laurie, that we did, where we just decided, hey, let's do a podcast. Like, what does it mean? We don't know. Let's just like fire up a Zoom call and talk. So if you listen back to that first episode, it's like audio quality is really poor. We were just talking to each other. But I listened back to that and I love just how natural the conversation was and how just how easy it was to talk about the things that we do. And I'm really glad that we decided to take that step, to just talk to each other. And I think just through talking and sharing what we already know, you kind of start discovering other things and making connections between things. And so those would be my high points for the year, that I'll cherish forever. But tell me about Series 2. Let's look forward. What have you got planned? What's coming down the pipes?
Yeah, we've got all sorts of exciting stuff coming up.
We have yet more mind-blowing podcast content, I think. It's bound to be. We're basically going to be talking in Season 2 about some of the changes that have been happening lately at LearnJam, and as well as looking at inclusive learning design, which is something we've been really developing a lot of our thinking around lately. So we're going to look at why it's important in the first place to make learning design more inclusive and some of the benefits. And we're going to take a kind of close-up look at some of the different dimensions of inclusion and risks of exclusion and how that can affect a learner's experience and how we can design better experiences so that more people can participate fully, since all participation is worthy and we really want to develop new experiences for learning that include everybody. So it's going to be a very exciting season, really looking forward to it. A lot of guests coming to talk to us and share their insights. And I hope that you'll stay with us as a listener, Tim, if not as a presenter. We're going to miss you.
Totally.
Thanks so much for passing on the baton.
It's been an absolute joy, and I can't wait, like I say, to hear what you guys come up with. And good luck. Enjoy it. And I will be listening to every word, and I can't wait.
Thanks.
Cool.
Thanks.
Cheers,
Thanks
Tim.
for everything.
Yeah.
And farewell. Good luck.
Catch you later.
Yeah. See you, Tim.
Bye.
Bye.
Right, now Tim's gone. It's just you and me, Laura.
Just you, me, and some dimensions.
ILXD dimensions, inclusive
Right.
learning experience design. You briefly touched on this, that we're going to be talking a lot in Season 2 about the dimensions of inclusive learning design.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly are those dimensions?
That is a very good question. And you're not the first person to ask. I mean, we throw these words around a lot, like inclusivity and dimensions and levels and things. And what I was referring to and what we're going to explore in the episodes in Season 2, I was referring to a framework that we worked on. A few months ago now, we concluded the project, but now we're using these things all the time. The project was designed to sort of map the different ways in which a learning experience can potentially include or exclude some learners. So when I talked about these dimensions of inclusive learning design, I'm actually talking about a specific framework.
Mm-hmm.
And this all started with some research into barriers, because barriers is this word that comes up a lot when you hear about inclusion in education, is that it's not just about how to include people, but it's about what is stopping them from being included in the first place?
Right.
And how aware are we of these different things? And at what levels do they operate? You know, are they little things that are easily overlooked? Are they really big things that we're all very aware of? Are they somewhere in between, or do they change? You know, like there are some things that we become better at talking about and more aware of that 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 50 years ago, nobody thought about. So we started out with this research to try and first kind of list all these many, many different ways that learning experiences can include or exclude some learners, and then plot that in a logical framework that helps us when we're designing a learning experience. Because of course we're all human as learning designers, so we also have blind spots and biases and things we're not aware of. So this is a way to just map out that thinking and make sure that our blind spots don't turn into barriers for learners.
There's all sorts of potential barriers for learners, and some of them are going to be incredibly obvious and ones that would jump to mind straight away, but there are going to be hidden ones or ones that we might just not to think of in the moment while working on a particular project.
Exactly.
So the idea is that by codifying this in some way and turning this into a framework that we can then use that to check ourselves against and to check what we're doing against, and to make sure that we're not unwittingly throwing up barriers in front of learners. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's certainly one way to use it. And there are different ways that we might use this framework. But yes, the ideal situation in designing any learning experience would be to have a representative of every possible learner who might use that experience or have that experience on the design team. But of course, that's not realistic. It's not practical. So we do the best that we can in our small team with our awareness of, from our own training, our own lived experience, our own experience of learning design. And then this framework is a kind of check and balance so that, yes, as you said, we don't unwittingly throw up barriers.
Yeah.
Because, of course, obvious is a relative term. So if I have always experienced some sort of exclusion or marginalization because of some aspect of my identity, then starting a new learning experience, it might be very obvious to me if I'm likely to hit that barrier again. But it might not be obvious to you because your lived experience, would be different to mine. And once I mention it, you might think, oh, yeah, okay, of course, that's obvious. But it's relative. And so, yes, this is a way of helping us manage the learning design process and try to be as inclusive as possible from the beginning.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also important to say that this is not a tool just for LearnJam. This is a tool that LearnJam is wanting to get out into the world and to, for everyone who's involved in designing learning experiences to be using in some form.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's publicly available, and we're very open to feedback in how people use it and how useful they find it, because these tools are always open to improvement and iteration based on how people need to use them and how practically useful they find them.
So it's the dimensions of inclusive learning design. What actually are the dimensions?
Yeah, the way we mapped it out in the end was to say that there were, broadly speaking, 4 dimensions along which a learning design might be more or less effective and inclusive. So one is about the learners themselves. So what does the human bring to the learning experience? Because, of course, you can design a course or an app or a book or something like that, but when the person arrives to study from that, they'll bring their own background, their own expectations, their own identity, their own needs. So there's the learner. That's one dimension.
Yeah.
Then there's the what. So if we've got the who, we've also got the what. So what actually are they learning? What is the content? What is the syllabus? What is the topic? And then there's the where. So the learning environment. And that could be about the physical environment. So it could be about a classroom, or indeed if someone's learning from home, it might be about what room they're studying in. Or it could be a digital environment that we're talking about. So it could mean an app, say, or a platform, or a website, or a learning management system of some sort. And then the 4th dimension is about the methods and the modes. So how does the learner interact with this material and this learning experience? Is it timetabled in a certain way, or is it totally self-study? What is the learning philosophy that underpins it all? What approach is taken? So those are the 4 different. You've got the who, then you've got the what, you've got the where, and you've got the how. And the why, I suppose, falls under the who as well. Why is the learner there at all? What motivates them? What brought them to this learning experience?
Make sure I've got this right. We've got the who, the what, the where, and the how of the dimensions. And then for each of those dimensions, there are a number of barriers, potential barriers, opportunities, things to consider. And I know that we've looked at them at sort of at various layers as well. We probably don't need to get into that right now, but I mean, maybe it'd be quite interesting just briefly to talk through like what are some of the barriers or the challenges that the people face as learners or that we face as learning designers within each of these dimensions. And I know we're going to go into this in our conversations with our guests as part of season 2, but it might be interesting just to, from our point of view, what are the things that kind of jump to mind for each of those dimensions?
Yeah, so a kind of preview of what's coming in much more detail in season 2. So we have one episode about each of the dimensions. To give some examples, you mentioned the different levels that these can operate at. So we often think at the very micro level, the very specific to a particular learner or a particular learning experience. And so let's say a learner has some kind of support need related to their physical form, their physical body. So let's say, for example, a learner has limited mobility, and that affects whether they can get into a classroom or sit at the desk or access the school. So we often talk about physical disabilities. What we've tried to do in the ILXD dimensions is focus more on ability, not disability.
Yeah.
But this is something to be considered if you're designing a learning experience in the physical environment. So the very micro level, the very specific to a learner, how does their ability to move through a physical space affect that learning experience? And what do we need to do to accommodate that so they can participate fully?
Yeah.
So that's one, say, familiar example. Then if we look at a kind of much higher, like meta level, so something that you might not immediately think is about learning, but it will undoubtedly affect a learner's experience. So if we think about the same dimension, we think about the learner themselves. Let's imagine that that particular learner is not a very confident person. Maybe they had some negative experiences of school when they were younger. Maybe they feel like they find learning difficult and they don't really have strategies in place to help themselves when they struggle with learning something new. That might be something that they just think, or we just think, is a personality trait. Oh, maybe not a very confident person, or they are not sure of their strengths and weaknesses. So even though it doesn't seem to be specific to learning, it will definitely affect their participation in a learning experience. And so we've tried to consider the different dimensions at these different levels, going from things that feel very concrete and almost obvious, like your physical ability and mobility, up to the very meta levels of things to do with the environment generally, the person more generally. And they will still affect their experience of learning.
Yeah, I think it's a great example. And that's the kind of thing that maybe at first glance is not immediately obvious, isn't it? That last example that you just gave. Thinking about things like physical abilities and the requirement to make learning products accessible and so on, that's kind of front of mind for most people involved in the creation of learning experiences. But going to that more meta level, self-confidence, for example, or belief that I can learn this thing, that I've got what it takes to become good at this skill, for example. It's a very different kind of thing. But if we're going to be designing an inclusive learning experience, then that's an important part of that dimension to factor into your learning design, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a critical part. And I think this is why we like talking about learning experiences rather than, say, designing a course.
Yeah.
Because you could design a course that covers all the things that someone needs to know about a subject and it's all packaged very nicely. But let's say it's delivered wholly online and that person doesn't have any access to the internet. So there's an environmental issue. They don't have connectivity. Well, then, however amazing your course is, that learner's experience will either be poor or not exist. And I think when you start thinking about the higher levels, I say higher in the relative sense of, very specific up to more abstract or more general, Those are often things that get overlooked because they're quite hard problems to solve, or they feel like they fall outside the remit of a learning designer. But we absolutely have to be aware of them if we're designing learning experiences. Even if we can't directly change them or control them, we have to be aware of them because they will affect the learner's experience. Yeah. So definitely very important to think about all the different levels that the dimensions work at.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting because that's what you were just talking about in a way, was our way into this whole topic, because we started by thinking about the fact that as a result of the COVID pandemic, people were being excluded from learning because of the sudden shift to online, and people not having enough bandwidth at home to join live classes online, or even just not having enough devices, or one device shared between a whole household.
Exactly.
How do all the kids in the family learn online at the same time when there's one computer in the house? That kind
exactly.
That's what's been really interesting in a way, because like I said, that was our entry point to this whole topic. It's like, wow, this is a major problem, and obviously it was a red hot live problem at that time, and it still is to some extent. And then from there, it's like, well, what are all the other things that we need to be thinking about that to make online learning more inclusive? Because it's going to be a hell of a lot more than just that.
Exactly.
That's the thing that people are talking about a lot.
Exactly. And I think it goes to show as well that all of these factors are always in play, but some of them are more or less relevant at specific moments. So it's always a kind of privilege to be able to overlook one of these elements if your circumstances mean that element is not a barrier for you. But that can change very quickly. So suddenly a lot of people were experiencing an exclusion from learning for the first time and feeling, really left out. And that just opens your eyes to the fact that actually a lot of people around the world for various reasons are excluded. It's just that if you're not, you might not realize how easily we can accidentally exclude people. Or so it was a very interesting way into this area, and it's something that I'm really, really glad we've spent a lot of time building on and now really specialize in, because it's so valuable to have that awareness when you're designing a learning experience.
Absolutely. All right, so I am looking forward to all of the upcoming episodes. So we've got 4 guest interviews, conversations with friends of Learn Jam, where in each one we're talking through one of the 4 dimensions.
We've got fantastic guests, really good insights, really good conversations. I'm looking forward to those episodes.
It's going to be great. All right, then. I will see you, Laura, in the first of those, in episode 2 shortly.
Yeah. See you in season 2, episode 2.
Yep. Adventures in Learning Design is brought to you by Learn Jam. You can find out more about us and the work that we do at learnjam.com. And if you're interested to learn more about inclusive learning design and to download our ILXD dimensions, then head over to learnjam.com/resources.